Hi, this is Emerald and welcome to the Diamond Net, and today I'm going to be giving you a brief overview of the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. Alright, so the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, also called the MBTI for short, was created in 1943 by Catherine Cook Briggs and Isabel Briggs Myers, and it was designed originally to help place women for jobs in the workplace. Since the men were off to war, women during that time were expected to go out and work, and so they wanted to place the women in careers that would work for them. So they created this assessment, but this assessment is even used still today. Alright, so what the MBTI does is it categorizes people into one of 16 different categories based on whether or not they're introverted or extroverted, sensing or intuitive, thinking or feeling, or judging and perceiving. And so they go between 4 different categories, and you either fall on one side of that dichotomy or the other. So the MBTI can be used to show people's strengths and weaknesses. It could also point people in the direction of what career paths or life paths are best for them, and really just helps you get a little bit more self-knowledge by having a framework to think about your personality under. Now, when it comes to frameworks, one thing that you want to be careful with is you don't want to start reducing people just down to this framework, because there are a million different ways to look at a human personality, and there are so many different combinations of traits that go into being a human being that it's hard to just stick people in one of 16 categories. So just a word of caution there. Also, I'm an INFJ, and I've met several other INFJs just here on YouTube, and in fact I'm going to be doing a collaboration video with INFJ Sean here on YouTube, which will be really good, I think. And so I've noticed that he and I are very different people based on other things. So, you know, this is by no means like the end-all be-all, like this is your type and, you know, that's what you are. So never mistake a framework for the real thing, because the real thing is really beyond explanation, and you don't want to start clinging to an identity. But that said, I do think that the MBTI is a valuable assessment, especially for people who are trying to make career decisions or young people who are in high school or college, and I think it's a really great test to take. I also have a bit of advice for when you find your type. So for me, I'm an INFJ, which means I'm introverted, intuitive, feeling, and judging. And so I find that it's very helpful for me to actually develop the contrapositive traits of that. So instead of introversion, try to be more extroverted. Instead of relying on my intuition all the time, try to be more sensing and noticing things in the environment. Instead of just feeling all the time, engaging the thinking. And then instead of judging, go more toward the perception aspect of things. You know, I feel like this will really help you get balance, but you always want to try to lead with your strengths. You don't want to try to do something that doesn't feel right to you, but it is a good idea to develop the contrapositive traits. Alright, so here's a picture of the 16 types, and I'm going to go ahead and give some brief definitions of all of the different traits that each type can have. Alright, so the first one is introversion versus extroversion. Alright, so an introvert is somebody who likes to have a lot of alone time and has to kind of recharge their batteries by going inward. They find that social situations may be kind of draining, and they have to kind of recharge their batteries. Whereas somebody who is more extroverted gets energy from being in social situations and going out and meeting people, and that's what really lights their fire. Alright, so the second set of traits is intuition versus sensation. So intuitive people find most of their inspiration and knowledge and things like that from the inside. So for me, I'm more intuitive, and so I get a lot more internally in terms of like where I come up with ideas, as opposed to finding things out in the world and just trying to go from external facts. So somebody who's intuitive finds things internally that they want to make into something real, whereas a person who is a sensing type is going to look out and is going to try to observe facts in nature. All right, the next dichotomy is thinking versus feeling. So this is basically a thinking person is going to lead with logical thought. They're going to rely on facts and they're going to make decisions from a factual basis. Whereas a feeling type like myself is going to consult their emotions first, and that's how they're going to make decisions. So this is like how you make decisions, either logical or you make it more emotionally. All right, the next dichotomy of traits is judging versus perceiving. So this is kind of like how people deal with deadlines and rules and things like that. So a person who is more on the judging side like myself likes to have things sort of fit in little boxes, likes to feel a sense of closure with things, and likes to feel like things have a rhyme and reason to them. Whereas someone who's perceiving doesn't necessarily need things to fit in nice, neat boxes like that, and they're more open to being a little bit more gray with how things are in their life logistically. And they might tend to look at deadlines instead of as being hard and fast, more like just suggestions, and like they like to play things by ear. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and flash up an example of how a personality type might be portioned out, just to give you an idea of how it works. So remember, they're always going to have one or the other of these 4 traits, and it's going to be divided in ratios. So let's say if somebody is an ISFP, they might have 62% for I and 38% for E, which means that they're pretty dominantly introverted, but they still have some extroverted tendencies. Now, if a person is, let's say, closer together with the S and the N, but they have more on the S, like this person, then you're still going to be sensing, but it's going to be more in the middle. Like for me, J and P are incredibly close together, like almost inseparable. But I'm still type out as an INFJ. So this person who's an ISFP, even though it's 55 to 45 in favor of sensation, they're still a sensation type. And then let's say if somebody's really polar, they might be polarly feeling with 90%, whereas thinking might only be 10%. And perceiving and judging could be really, really close together, like I said, with my personality type. So you see there's a ratio that happens here, and then there's also a lot of different things that go into it. And then they also have different cognitive types that correspond to these personality types, which I'll go into in another video. All right, so now that you have an idea about what each of the terms mean, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you a brief overview of the personality types. And so you might want to go ahead, pause the video if you haven't taken the assessment, and just kind of give a good guess as to which type you are. All right, so I'll go ahead and I'll start with the introverts first. I'll start with INFP. INFPs, also called the healer, are very, very interested in understanding and helping people. Now, their strengths are that they're very loving and empathetic, but one of their weaknesses is that they feel very attacked when they're criticized. And so that can be like a weakness in terms of like if they needed to improve in something and their boss maybe told them that they had to do something a different way. Some famous INFPs include Andy Warhol, Björk, Edgar Allan Poe, J.K. Rowling, Kurt Cobain, and Tim Burton. All right, next up is INTP. An INTP is called the archetype because they want to rationally understand the world so that they can synthesize and create from that. So one of their strengths is that they are very, very imaginative and laid back people. But then on the other hand, they can be overtly critical and sort of cold sometimes. All right, so some famous INTPs are Abe Lincoln, Albert Einstein, Marie Curie, David Cronenberg, Sigourney Weaver, and Tina Fey. All right, next up is INFJ, which I am. These are called the counselor. So they want to seek meaning in things and then use those to harmonize perspectives. So some strengths are that they're good listeners and that they try to understand things at a deep level. But then also they tend to get bored easily and might be a little bit of a space cadet from time to time. Some famous INFJs are Carl Jung, Gandhi, Marilyn Manson, Adolf Hitler, Agatha Christie, and Mary Wollstonecraft. All right, next up comes INTJ, which is also called the mastermind. And INTJs are primarily interested in enacting their own ideas on the world. And so some strengths that INTJs have are that they stick to things and that they come up with really creative, original ideas. But some weaknesses are that they tend to be unemotionally aware and can be cold sometimes. Some famous INTJs include Karl Marx, Ayn Rand, Friedrich Nietzsche, Nikola Tesla, Jodie Foster, and Arnold Schwarzenegger. All right, so next up comes ISFP, also called the composer. Now, ISFPs are very, very friendly and kind, but tend to keep to themselves. So one thing that is a great trait that ISFPs have is that they're very present and aware, and they're very friendly. Some weaknesses they have are that they might keep to themselves too much and end up socially alienating themselves, despite the fact that they really like people. Some famous ISFPs include Jackie Kennedy, Thich Nhat Hanh, which I hope I pronounced that right, Paul McCartney, Michael Jackson, David Bowie, and Drew Barrymore. Next up comes ISTP. They're called the crafter because they like to notice things out in the environment, and they like to kind of break that down to its elements so that they can kind of store that and analyze what's going on. So some great things about ISTPs are that they're very effective and efficient in doing things, and they have a really, really solid framework for how they think about things. But some negative things is that they have a tendency to maybe be a little bit emotionally unaware and sort of abstract. Some famous ISTPs are Steve Jobs, the Dalai Lama, Vladimir Putin, Stanley Kubrick, Ellen Page, and Scarlett Johansson. All right, next up comes ISFJ, also called the protector, and they're very, very concerned with keeping everyone taken care of that they know. Now, some really great things is that if you know somebody who's an ISFJ, like they'll have a tendency to remember like details about you, and they really care about you, and they'll try to take care of you. Some negative things are that they might have a tendency to be self-sacrificing and not pay attention to their own needs. Some famous ISFJs are Rand Paul, Rosa Parks, Mother Teresa, Francisco Franco, Christopher Walken, and Kanye West. All right, next up comes ISTJ, also called the inspector, and these people are very quiet, serious, and responsible. So some positive things about ISTJs are that they are very practical and effective at what they do, and they really get the job done. But some negative things is that they might have a tendency to be emotionally unaware or distant, and that they have to be sort of dogmatically right. So dogma is sort of an issue here. Some famous ISTJs are Dwight D. Eisenhower, Sigmund Freud, Richard Nixon, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, Natalie Portman, and Queen Elizabeth. All right, next comes the extroverts. All right, so first up is ENFP, and these are called the champion, and these people are very fun-loving and optimistic, and that's one of their strengths is that they're so much fun to be around, and they can be quite spontaneous and interesting people. Some downsides are that they get bored easily and they might get restless. All right, so some famous ENFPs are Hunter S. Thompson, Mark Twain, Anne Frank, Walt Disney, Osho, and George Carlin. All right, next up comes ENTP, and these people are very outspoken and imaginative. So some strengths is that they come up with really, really interesting ideas, and that they're very laid back and easygoing people. Some weaknesses is that they tend to get bored easily, and they might leave some of their works or inventions undone. So they might have a tendency to just skip on to the next task. Some famous ENTPs are Benjamin Franklin, Catherine the Great, Barack Obama, Amy Poehler, Jon Stewart, and Salma Hayek. All right, so next up comes ENFJ, also called the teacher, and these are very affectionate leaders who see everyone's potential. So some strengths are that they are very, very compassionate and kind people who are very optimistic. But on the other hand, though some weaknesses that they tend to be manipulative and maybe somewhat clingy. Some famous ENFJs are people like Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, Maya Angelou, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Oprah, and Helena Bonham Carter. All right, next up comes ENTJ, also called the Field Marshal. And these people are brass tacks realists. And for this reason, their strengths are that they're very, very effective at what they do. And they know kind of like the best way to get from point A to point B. Now, some weaknesses are that they have a tendency to want to control things a lot and can be a little domineering. Some famous ENTJs are people like Bill Gates, Aristotle, Carl Sagan, Bernie Sanders, Charlize Theron, and Adele. All right, next up comes ESFP, and this personality type is called the performer. So ESFPs have a tendency to be very fun, and they really love their social life. So some strengths of ESFPs are that they tend to be very cooperative, fun-loving people, but on the other hand, they might tend to also procrastinate things and kind of like shirk off their work and not pay attention to the more practical aspects of life. Some famous ESFPs include Desmond Tutu, Bill Clinton, Wayne Dyer, Beyonce, Quentin Tarantino, and Katy Perry. Next up comes ESTP, and it's also called the promoter, and these people are very practical people who have an eye out toward the environment and the everyday world. Some strengths of ESTPs is they tend to be very flexible, adaptable, and tolerant, but some weaknesses is that they can be unknowingly insensitive or overindulge in material comforts. Some famous ESTPs include Theodore Roosevelt, John F. Kennedy, Angelina Jolie, Jack Nicholson, Meryl Streep, and Madonna. All right, next up comes ESTP, also called the promoter. And ESTPs are very, very compassionate and warm-hearted and focused outwardly toward the people in their environment. So one of their strengths is they have a tendency to really provide for other people, and they're really looking out for other people's best interests. But one of the weaknesses there is that they might have a tendency to overlook their own interests and feel sort of resentful because other people maybe don't notice as much as they're contributing. Some famous ESFJs include Pope Francis, Sarah Palin, Barbara Walters, Elton John, Woody Harrelson, and Penelope Cruz. All right, next up comes ESTJ. These people are called the supervisor, and that's because these people have a lot of leadership skills and have a clear set of rules and logical standards by which they kind of judge the world. So some positive things about ESTJs are that they're born leaders and that they have a very logical way of thinking about things. However, these people can be very blunt and also emotionally insensitive. Some famous ESTJs include Margaret Thatcher, Hillary Clinton, Dr. Phil, Martha Stewart, Bill O'Reilly, and Uma Thurman. All right, so that's all the personality types. But of course, if you feel like your type doesn't necessarily fit you, the Myers-Briggs type indicator isn't necessarily the best metric for everyone. Also, another key thing to keep in mind is that there's no better or worse types. They're just suited toward different strengths and weaknesses. So if you feel like, oh man, I got a bad type, it's not. It's just you have to work it to use it the right way. Another thing to keep in mind for this assessment is that it's very, very sensitive to the values that you hold in the environment that you're in. When I first took this test when I was 19 years old, I was tested out as an INTP, which doesn't really fit my personality very well. So I think at the time I just held a lot of the same values as INTP, and I think that that was just kind of what ended up happening whenever I took the test. So it was kind of like, oh yeah, I like that trait, but it didn't necessarily describe me. So also keep that in mind that, you know, if your parents are a particular way and you still live at home with your parents, like if you're a teenager, that can have a big effect on you. Or like if you are around a lot of people who are a particular type, that can have a big effect on you too. So just keep in mind that it's very, very sensitive to the situations that you're in, and just to do your best to try to answer it as close to authentic as you possibly can. Alright, so that's all I have for you today. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead, give it a big thumbs up and click the subscribe button below. Other than that, that's all I have for you, and until next time, keep becoming more you.